So here I've got the Type 53. This was the Chinese copy of the Soviet-made M44 carbine. It's a short Mosin Nagant. It's got the same length as the M38, but like the M44, it has the folding bayonet here. And so we're going to put a couple rounds through it. Take my strip clip. Welcome to Mail Start Minutes, I'm Nick. Today I'm going to be taking a look at another Mosin Nagant M44 carbine pattern rifle. This is a Chinese-made Type 53. Recently I did a video on another M44 variant that was the Polish-built WZ44. And if you haven't seen that, I recommend you take a look at that now. To tell the story of the Type 53 and how it came to be, we need to go back a couple of years. Going back to the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949, Chiang Kai-shek, the nationalist forces, the government of the Republic of China have been defeated on mainland China and have been pushed to Taiwan, onto the island of Taiwan, leaving Mao and the communists on mainland China with a vast assortment of small arms, from rifles that were given as aid by the Allies during World War II to the Chinese, to Arisakas that had been left by the Japanese after they withdrew, and a vast assortment of Mauser rifles that spanned from the late Qing dynasty through the warlord era to just pre-World War II in the form of the Hanyang 88, the 1907 pattern Mauser, the Type 21 Mauser, the Type 30 and the Type 35 Chiang Kai-shek Mauser rifle. So the Chinese had a big mishmash of non-standard small arms. The only thing they could really standardize on was the fact that a lot of them happened to be chambered in 8mm Mauser. 1950 rolls around, the Korean War begins. The Chinese People's Volunteer Army sends millions of troops in to take part, many of which are armed with Mosin Nagant M9130s and M44 carbines, almost certainly made by the Soviet Union. There also are still a good handful of Chinese troops and possibly North Korean troops armed with the 1888 Hanyang rifle, but most of the time you see them with, if they're carrying rifles, they're carrying some type of Mosin. Fast forwarding a little bit towards the end of the Korean War, in 1953, Soviet engineers go to China to help set up a production line of Mosin Nagants. And in the late spring to early summer of 1953, the production line is set up. The Soviets supplied parts for an initial pre-run batch of 30,000 rifles in China. These rifles are identified with an A prefix, and we can identify when they first were made, which was June 1953, by looking at serial number 1. It came up not too long ago at auction, and we can use it as reference. Approximately 30,000 of these rifles were made entirely out of Soviet parts, assembled by the Chinese. This run of A prefix rifles would be made until about December 1953 to maybe February 1954. And from there you switch to entirely Chinese-made rifles, which this one is one of, and I'm going to bring the camera in a little bit closer so you can take a look at the barrel markings, some of the things that make this rifle different, and we can discuss how these rifles progressed in production and Chinese service. So I got you up close, and I'm going to bring you in a little bit closer. If you look here at the barrel marking, you can see a couple of interesting things about this rifle. First off, you see some Chinese characters, which roughly translate to Type 54, or 54 type. And below that you have the date. Here it says 1954.5. My research has led me to believe that after that decimal point, that last number corresponds with the month of the year this rifle was produced, meaning this would be, if we go based on that, this is a May 1954 produced rifle. As I said, as far as I can tell, if we go based on that, the last of the A prefix rifles that were built with Soviet parts and built under Soviet observation were completed in January to February 1954, meaning that this rifle was made one of the first rifles to have been made under complete Chinese control with all Chinese parts at the factory. Another thing to note is the factory marking being 296 on this rifle. Factory 296 would have its designation changed with a nomenclature change issued by the PLA, as far as I can tell, in mid-1955, because I found examples of rifles that are dated 1955.5 or 6 that still say 296, and also rifles in 1955 dated marked 26, as in Arsenal or Factory 26, famous from the Triangle 26 SKSs that they were also the first people to make, or first factory to make SKSs in China. To my knowledge, that was a direct change, was the designation from 296 to 26. The Type 53 overall isn't really any different than any other late pattern Mosin Nagant M44. It has the later style of bayonet with the relief cut under the muzzle, at the edge of the muzzle ring, and the extra set of hooks at the front. It has the same style of rear sight as any other Type 54. Same style stock with which is basically an M38 stock with the inlet cut for the bayonet. It has full escutcheons from the factory, and so unlike the WZ44, it never had partial escutcheon. It never had a open sling slot and a partial escutcheon on the front. The Chinese Type 53 is, to my knowledge, probably the most produced variation and version of the M44. There aren't very good production numbers that have been released by China on how many of these they made. They're also probably one of the last ones that were produced, with examples dated as late as 1961 being found and reported. The legacy of this rifle, though, I think is probably the most significant of any M44 carbine. That, in the sense that Soviet M44s did see action towards the end of World War II, but for the most part didn't. They did fight in Korea, but these were one of the most common rifles that you saw in Vietnam in the hands of the People's Army, the PAVN, and the Viet Cong. These rifles, because of that, many of these rifles came back with veterans. This one is a Navy Arms import, as you can see here. And I believe that it came out of Albania. China was known to supply a lot of small arms to Albania, whether it be in the form of SKSs, in this case Type 53 Mosins, or Type 56 assault rifles, their variation of the AK-47. Overall, Type 53s are seen by a lot of people as kind of undesirable, just because they're Chinese made, they're cheap, made in China. They're pretty solid. They have a lot of muzzle flash. If you can get it at the right time, you see a nice big fireball coming out of this thing if you shoot it. Because of that though, these are generally still the cheapest version of the Mosin Nagant that can be found commonly today, with some of these still being able to be found as cheap as $300. Granted, along with that, you do get them in fairly rough condition. This one, I believe, being one that was imported from Albania, has clearly been there and done that with some scuffs and dings and cracks and nicks in the stock. You have that big gouge right there. These things have been there and done that. A lot of these do have pretty poor barrels that have been eroded by corrosive ammunition over the years. This one's actually a pretty good shooter. But that's just a brief overview of the Chinese Type 53 Mosin Nagant carbine. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share it with your friends. And I'll see you in the next video.